Welcome, everyone, to Zeta Live. I have the pleasure of introducing some of our amazing speakers today. I'm Winnie Shen, SVP of our Data Cloud. Our very first session today is on humanizing experiences through individualization. Rebecca Trebble, head of customer at the Very Group, one of the largest online retailers in the UK. Todd Leiser, the global head of CRM, analytics, and marketing technology at Spartan Race, one of the largest obstacle course race and endurance brands in the world. And Hope Barrett, director of audience intelligence at CNN, the world's most widely distributed source of news. And Zeta's own James Beauchamp, our SVP of client services. Thank you guys all for joining us. Really excited to hear your panel.
Good morning. Thank you, Winnie. Welcome to Zeta Live, and what I'm sure will be an enlightening conversation about the humanization of individualization. I'm James Beauchamp, as Winnie said, and joining me today, three experts from three fantastic brands who'll be sharing their experiences with us. Grounding ourselves in the topic at hand, engaging with individuals at that human level. Hope, would you perhaps be able to talk to us about exactly what individualization is, how it's different to personalization, and why connecting at that human level is important?
Sure, thank you, James. So personalization is a technique where a marketer, or in my case a publisher, are essentially tailoring a message to a specific segment or audience group. So essentially personalization requires a basic customer data set in order to create those segments. Individualization is actually taking personalization a step further. So you, instead of actually tailoring a message for the group, you're looking at the individual themselves. So in order to do that, you need a much richer data set. Humanization is an essential part of individualization because you need to be able to really know that individual, anticipate their needs, and even more so satisfy those needs. So those are essentially the differences between personalization, individualization, and humanization. At CNN, we're really more at the personalization level. We have primarily an anonymous audience, so we don't really have the data sets we need to do individualization, but even more so, that's not necessarily something we're aiming for either.
Todd, how does that align with your business at Spartan Race?
Yeah, I mean, we really run the gamut there across segmentation, personalization, and ultimately the individualization of what we do, because for somebody to do one of our events, it's a very individual activity, right? Your experience with that event, and then big part of our business model is really photos, results, sharing, and that becomes very personal to you as a racer or as a consumer of our products.
Fantastic. So we're talking a lot about a richer data set, creating more relevance, and I think Rebecca, the amount of data, the scale and scope of data has exploded, of course, over recent years, and perhaps that's true most for retailers. For folks just starting on their journey thinking about individualization, could you talk a little bit about what the most important data attributes, data sets, data sources that you would consider would be?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, James. So for anyone who doesn't know, the Very Group is an online department store. We offer like 40,000 different products across lots of different categories. We also offer financial services. So when you're purchasing their goods, you can purchase with financial services. When we do our individualization of email in particular, we are using many different data sources to do that. So that might be looking at your tactical behavior or behavioral kind of indicators that we might have. We might be talking to partners and understanding what information they can give us. We might be joining that up against all the different marketing points in which we can hook into that person and understand what they're doing. Or it might be the information that person has specifically given us. And within the financial services world, they give you a lot of information. So it's hard to pinpoint which specific bit you would recommend someone collects. But from our perspective, it's most valuable because we collect across the entire kind of spectrum, and then we use all of that to enable us to talk to the customer. What I would say, though, is there's three things that you really need to do kind of individualism really, really well, and they are, you must have that data, you must have a significant data set to enable you to do it. You need technology to enable you to crunch that data and really condense it down into something that's actually usable. And then the final thing you need is content. So you need a lot of content to enable you to talk to customers in very individualized ways. And you need technology to help you with that content as well.
Thank you. Todd, an increasingly valuable source of data is that zero-party data, so the data that consumers surrender essentially direct to the brands. Could you talk a little bit about the importance of that at Spartan Race and how you perhaps convince consumers to provide more, share more data with you?
Yeah, for those who don't know Spartan, we actually are a multi-brand endurance portfolio. So, Tough Mudder, Spartan Race, Spartan. Is that working? Yeah. Okay. Spartan Trail, Deca Fit. We have multiple brands under the portfolio of Spartan, and zero-party data is really critical to the equation because most people that do a race, our brands really came out of the social media space, right? 10 years, 12 years ago when Facebook really started, became very much a FOMO type product, right? You want to share your photos, you want to share what you did this weekend, the hard thing that crushed you, that you didn't expect to accomplish but did. So there's, I would say, two critical elements to that in Spartan. One is the photos, right? So we invest, we probably take anywhere between 10 and 15 million photos a year at our events. All of that is facially recognizable on our site, so consumers can find that, racers can find those photos, and then and the results. So the other side of it, particularly on the Spartan side of the business, is really how well did you perform relative to your demographic, your age group. If you're in, and we have various heats, are you an elite athlete? Are you an age group, or are you a kind of an open racer running for fun? So that zero-party data is super critical to us because over 60% of the people that run our events tell us that it was somebody else that referred them. As much as we love digital media and email and all those other things, 60% say it was a friend and sharing of that information, sharing of that photo, sharing of those race registrations that really motivated them to come to our race. So we make it really easy and we empower the user to actually share those photos, find those photos, and get them out into their network.
So when I mentioned sort of, convincing folks to share data, you're finding that because it's such a personal experience on the Spartan side, you're gaining that trust straight out of the gate. Thank you. Hope, how about on the publishing side for CNN? Is gathering first-party or zero-party data, I should say, is that a key part of your strategy?
That's a great question. So historically, no. However, we know, we can see what's coming. So for example, initially it was 2023, now it's 2024. Google told us a while ago that their plans for the cookie. And essentially right now, we rely on cookies for advertising and essentially to do what to essentially learn what we do know now about our customer. As I mentioned previously, we have a primarily anonymous audience. So we don't require registration, although we are starting to experiment with registration. So right now, the most someone can give us is their email address. So again, looking towards the future though, we are again starting to test registration and seeing what that looks like. We also have some tests in place where we're looking to leverage data from our larger company. So that's going to be Warner Brothers Discovery. And essentially from a first-party data set perspective, what data sets does HBO have? What data sets do some of these other brands have that, if we have essentially a first-party cookie across all our various properties, can we leverage at CNN? There's not necessarily a ton of overlap between audiences. We've started to look at that already. So we have a lot of work to do, but that's where we are right now.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Shifting gears a little bit, an interesting question I think is asked is, does individualization replace segmentation and personalization? If you think about that journey from, on the left-hand side, mass marketing, as we get a little bit more sophisticated in segmentation, personalization, and then individualization on the right-hand side, does individualization replace those other previously used techniques? Hope, would you be able to talk about that a little bit in the context of CNN?
Sure. So for CNN, I would say no. So our mission at CNN is to inform, to engage, and to empower the world. And what we mean by that is providing the information, providing the facts people need to make informed decisions. So when we think about that, it's not necessarily creating content that that individual gravitates towards or that individual is seeking out. It's really, again, what information do people need to be informed, to empower themselves. So from that perspective, our approach is essentially creating content across a wide array of areas and topics from around the world. And we have bureaus around the world, and CNN domestic, of course, but also CNN international. And that's really our approach. Really, we want to have a well-informed consumer.
Fantastic. Rebecca, how about for yourself at the very group? Is there a place for segmentation, personalization, and individualization?
Yeah, I think that there is. So at the moment, we're using all of those techniques, and we were talking yesterday about the kind of upper funnel elements. So where we don't know the customer that well, any element of segmentation that we can do that really, really helps us to tap into that customer, understand them, target them really effectively. Where we move much, much lower down the funnel, we've got a relationship with that customer where we understand them really well. We can then use individualism to really then hone in on them and give them really, really relevant information about things that they might want to purchase or how they might want to purchase those items.
That's fantastic. So you find sort of the further folks get in the funnel, that's when it really comes to life, when you're starting to gather more about people. That's great.
Without doubt.
Todd, how about yourself?
No, I agree. I think at the different stages of the funnel, your various levels of individualization or personalization come into play. I was also thinking about, people don't wake up, our racers, our consumers, our buyers don't typically wake up in the morning saying, hey, I'm going to go sign up for a race and do something really hard, right? So there's a discovery element as you kind of move away from individualization to more segmentation, where we still need to make them aware of a broader portfolio of offerings, right? Training content, food and nutrition content, things that aren't necessarily tailored to them, but really allow them to see the broader content set and what other people are doing out in the market around them. And then as they move their way down that funnel, it's okay, you live in Boston, so you're going to sign up for the Fenway Park race, right? And that becomes very personalized.
Fantastic, thank you. Generally speaking, I think what we've learned a lot about that there are two sort of big challenges related to individualization. One being the gathering and interpretation of the data, and then the second being the content creation and the execution side of things. So focusing on just that content creation and execution side of things, Rebecca, could you perhaps talk a little bit about how you continue to create those highly relevant one-to-one experiences and keep that sort of production overhead to a minimum?
Yeah, so at Very, we don't have sort of thousands of content creators. We might have 100 at sort of max. And so what we do is kind of two things really. One, as I mentioned, we keep it really low in the funnel. So we make sure we know customers really, really well. We can target them really carefully. And we can talk to them in a way that's really clear to them. So that limits the amount of content that we need to do that at that level. The second thing that we do is we use technology. So we use technology to have templates that enable us to have various different elements in whatever we're trying to talk, whatever asset we might be talking to the customer through. So email, for example, and we're able to then take the different pieces of content that we have and place them into an email that then can feel very individualized for each person that we're talking to. And that enables us to do that at some level of scale. So that's how we kind of manage that kind of difficulty.
Thank you very much. Todd, you sort of alluded to the idea of content that had been created associated with an athlete, whether that's user-generated content, you consider it user-generated content, but could you talk about how Spartan handles that content challenge in the context of that user-generated content?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of aspects of content as it relates to Spartan, Tough Mudder, and our brands, right? In some cases, we're creating content, training content, fitness content, great FOMO content to push out into the world, but a really big underlying element of the business is the user communities and the groups. So we have built over time, and they've kind of happened naturally, right? As there's a lot of sub-communities that have been created underneath the brand. Facebook groups as one example, right? If you live in the Southwest, there's a Southwest Spartans group. Those groups, they're modest in size, 50 to 100,000 group members, but they are incredibly passionate about the brand. They share content literally every day with each other, and that generates a ton of UGC. So we've kind of created almost this viral coefficient around the brand, which is, a racer or a customer ultimately is generating content 365 days a year, even though they may only race a few times a year. And then there's a whole community aspect and a group orientation that kind of gets built around that.
That's fantastic. And the race photos and things that the races themselves take, do they ever make it into the the email content, for example?
I probably have made it into email content. I'm looking at Stephanie right in front of me. Certainly, there's a ton of great photography that comes out of our races, video content. UGC in general is becoming a bigger part of the equation overall.
Fantastic, thank you. And Hope, you have, I believe, around 4,000 journalists around the world at CNN creating content. Content is your business as well. Can you talk a little bit about whether your journalists think about humanizing the content as they're creating it?
So I would say our journalists are thinking about, again, the facts. So if I think about the CNN Center in Atlanta, which is where I'm from, we walk into the door, it says facts first. And that's really what our journalists are driven by. So thinking about humanization, our approach is really more so if you present the facts, again, back to our mission statement, you're informing our users, our readers, people who watch CNN. So that's really what it's about. If I think about other areas, so for example, I'm part of our newsletter team, our approach there is more so a sort of a self-selection. We have about 38 different newsletters that people can get, and they're in different topic areas. So a person who goes to our newsletter hub and signs up, they could say, oh, I am interested in this, Eat Better newsletter, or I am interested in fitness, I'm not getting enough, or I am interested in what happened yesterday, so let me get the top 5 things. And that's sort of the self-selection that we allow our users to do. The challenge we have as part of the newsletter team is identifying those areas, those segments that we don't have that people want. So that's sort of like our closest way of personalization. It's really determining what those segments are based on user behavior on our site or even reader feedback. I mean, people send us email and we read it and we get lots of ideas and things like that from email as well.
Fantastic, thank you. A little sort of blue sky exercise here. So, money, time, resources not being an object. Rebecca, are there programs related to individualization that you wish you had in place today, you just haven't been able to get around to?
Yeah, I think some of the things that there's lots of things that maybe aren't individualization that we would like to get to if money and budgets were kind of no object. I think one of the areas where we're keen to really tap into a bit more is advocacy. So at the moment, we don't do a massive amount in the space of advocacy, and we know our customers really well. We know those that are scoring us highest in their net promoters, so we know who really loves our offer, etc. And we're not doing a lot to say, hey, maybe you already have a network of people who would love to be part of Barrett, who would love to shop on our platform. So we're not using that, we're not tapping into that at all. And if money was no object, and that is one of our biggest constraints, we would definitely move more and greater into that space. The other thing is building a whole community around our customers. So again, it's massively into the advocacy piece, but how do we kind of build more of a community between them? We know that they're very family focused, and we'd love to do more of kind of bringing them together and saying, you know what, actually, you all share lots of characteristics together. Maybe you want to do more sharing of content, etc., with one another. Maybe we want to think about how Very can offer you different things outside of, say, a shopping arena that might be helpful to you.
Fantastic, thank you. And Todd, or perhaps a question for Steph in the front row here. Are there things on the Spartan side that you wish you had in market, or are priorities as you develop your individualization processes?
Yeah, I think I mentioned the group orientation of our products, right? And that tends to be one of the barriers that many people have in deciding whether or not to participate in something like one of our events, right? Nobody wants to show up to the gym the first time by themselves. Nobody wants to go do that first event, that 5K, that marathon by themselves, right? And so I think as we think about the naturally occurring groups out there, being able to connect people together, there's a real human element to a race experience and being on site and the accomplishment that you get at the end. So I think there's a need for us to perhaps create community and allow people who are interested and like-minded to start to connect with one another and form those sub-teams and those subgroups. It's kind of hard to happen, and it doesn't happen in digital space. And when everyone's working remote, there isn't that water cooler talk anymore about, hey, I'm doing a Spartan race in a month. Would you like to come do it, right? So I think there's something more we could do there.
Fantastic. And Hope, for you, on the CNN side, I think there's slightly more limitations around the use of individualization with the way that you create content and go to market. Are there programs that you wish you had in place, perhaps outside of that?
Sure. So, yes, we have a lot of work ahead of us as far as getting additional first-party data. So we definitely need to get more email addresses. Our registration test will hopefully help us down that path. But like sort of big sky, even though we want to make sure people have the facts, we're not oblivious of the fact of people do have interests, and how can we satisfy those interests? So what that ends up looking like for us is recirculation modules. So if you read the newspaper online, you might see this is what other people are reading, or this might be something you're interested in next. Those are the types of modules we're starting to look at and test and develop internally. We also have units. I know a lot of news websites, when you scroll to the bottom, you start seeing all these interesting, we'll call them interesting topics and essentially clickbait type topics. Well, those definitely help us generate revenue, but they also take people off our site. So can we create recirculation modules that perform better, that actually keep people engaged with CNN and keep them coming back? Our goal is to really create habits and to really enhance engagement. And in order to do that, we need to know that individual. And again, it all starts for us with getting that email address, getting registration in place.
Thank you very much. It's fascinating. I think we have time for one final question that I'd like to ask you. And we're all in agreement that there continues to be opportunities to elevate the customer experience with data. But many marketers around the world are very cautious of what they call the creepy factor, and making sure that those experiences aren't too intrusive, too personal. Todd, do you share that concern at Spartan?
I think we all share that concern, but I always sort of look at it using the dry cleaner test, right? So when I walk into the dry cleaner on a Saturday morning, if every Saturday I walked up and they pretended they didn't know who I was or what I was there for, that would become really annoying. It's actually creepier not to recognize me than to actually recognize me. So I think there is a line there of crossing the creep factor, but I think we definitely use that data, and it's a big part. As I said earlier, people are sharing their medals on Monday mornings because they're excited that they did this thing, and we sort of want to help them. We want to empower our users, our customers, to really share their own data, right? Whether or not it's their photo, their results, or their medals on a Monday morning.
Fantastic. And Rebecca, question for you. Is that consistent with your experience across the pond, particularly as you think about additional constraints like GDPR?
Yeah, so there's a lot more constraint than there obviously is in the US, in the UK, around the level of information that customers share with you and how you can use that information. I think on the creepy factor, from our side, it's about building trust with your customers, making sure that your customers really feel that you're using their data and their information in a really useful way, a really relevant way to them. So for us, it's about saying to them, we've got your back, not we're watching your back. That's quite a different kind of feeling for a customer. So we don't want them to feel like, look how much data I've got on you. We want them to feel like, look how relevant I can be for you. Look how useful I can be to you. And so that's the fine balance between, the notification that goes off in the morning and said it'll take you 45 minutes to get to work, and you think, I've never told you where I work. Like, how do you know this? And it's that kind of, that very fine balance. At the same time, we have to be mindful that we're not providing customers necessarily with a service as such. We are providing them with a product that they can consume. And so it's being careful and mindful of how you use their data to get to that.
Great, thank you. And Hope, are there the same sensibilities that affect the publishing world?
So for us, as I mentioned, we don't have a lot of first-party data, so I'm not really worried about the creepiness factor. We really don't have the tools to do that. What we are concerned about content bubbles. So I mentioned previously how we're thinking about modules, recirculation modules that have content that interests you to keep you coming back, to keep you on CNN. Well, we want to make sure that it's still a part of our mission, which is to, again, facts and things like that. We don't want to create a situation where you end up only seeing the things you're interested in and you don't really expand that knowledge set. So that's really our concern, and in part, it's why we've been so deliberate in personalization, and part of the reason why we have these discussions all the time about, well, this is what we don't want, and actually our readers tell us that too. So I mentioned reader feedback, and also we do a lot of forums and, first-party research and that type of thing, and that's what we hear. So we're concerned about it, but we know our readers are concerned about it as well.
Well, thank you very much. And I'd like to thank Hope, Todd, and Rebecca for your thoughtful participation here today. And I would say that there's definitely a very common thread here. Wherever you are in that journey of individualization, they're great examples of how do we build trust with those consumers, those viewers, those athletes at the end of the day. So thank you very much. It's been a great conversation. And I want to thank the audience online and, of course, the folks in the room here as well for joining us. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day here at Zeta Live 2022.
Thanks, everyone.